In this classic game, Steinitz with the black pieces faces Chigorin with white in the 1892 World Championship. Let's see how every single move unfolded, one step at a time. White begins with pawn to e4. Black replies with pawn to e5, standard classical start. White develops knight to f3. Black mirrors with knight to c6. White brings out the bishop to b5, entering the Ruy Lopez. Black plays pawn to d6, a calm response defending the center. White develops knight to c3, reinforcing control over the center. Black plays bishop to d7, preparing queenside development. Now white pushes pawn to d4, striking the center. Black replies with knight to e7, flexible development, keeping options open. White develops bishop to g5, pinning the knight is a common idea. Black plays pawn to f6, breaking the pin but weakening the king's position slightly. White quietly retreats bishop to e3, preparing for castling. Black plays knight to g6, possibly eyeing f4. Now white plays queen to d2, looking to castle queenside or connect rooks. Black plays pawn to a6, attacking the bishop on b5. White retreats bishop to a4. Black pushes pawn to b5, gaining space and pushing back white's bishop. White retreats bishop to b3. Black develops knight to a5, eyeing the bishop and the queenside. White castles kingside, bringing safety to the king. Black responds with pawn to c6, strengthening the center and preparing b4. White captures in the center, pawn takes on e5. Black recaptures, pawn takes on e5. Now white develops bishop to g5, attacking again. Black calmly responds with bishop to e7 and preparing to castle. White brings the rook to d1, taking control of the open file. Black plays knight to b7, possibly preparing c5. White captures. Bishop takes on e7. Black recaptures with queen. Queen takes on e7. Now white brings knight to g5, jumping into the attack. Black plays rook to f8, defending the f-file. White grabs the h7 pawn with knight. Knight takes on h7. Black responds with rook to h8, creating tension on the h-file. White plays queen to g5, putting pressure. Black responds with knight to f4, hitting the queen and adding defense. White plays queen takes on e7, removing the queen from the board. Black plays king takes on e7. King now exposed, but no immediate threat. White retreats the knight back to g5. Black plays rook to h5, challenging the kingside again. White pushes pawn to h4, defending against the rook. Black captures, rook takes on h4. White plays pawn to g3, attacking the rook. Black lifts the rook, rook to g4. Then white plays knight to f3, reinforcing the kingside and keeping things solid. Black brings rook to f8, centralizing the rook and adding pressure. White develops the rook to d2, possibly planning to double up or defend. Black moves knight to c5, jumping into an active square, targeting white's position. White plays knight to h2, attacking the rook on g4. Black lifts the rook again, rook to g6, staying on the active file. Now white plays rook to e1, preparing to support the center and defend the king. Black responds with knight to h3, check. The knight jumps in with a check. White moves the king to g2, avoiding the check calmly. Black brings the knight to g5, reinforcing the kingside and keeping pressure. White develops the second rook, rook to e2, staying flexible. Black plays rook to h6, planning to double the rooks on the h-file. Now rook to e3 from white, reinforcing the third rank and defending tightly. Black brings the other rook to h8. Now both rooks are lined up and ready to strike. White plays knight to f1, protecting the h2 square and defending from the rooks. Black plays bishop to h3, check, forcing white's king to move again. White moves the king to g1. Black replies with bishop to g4, placing more pressure on the knight and the king side. White moves king to g2, stepping away from threats. Black plays pawn to b4, attacking the knight and expanding on the queen side. White responds with pawn to f4, giving the king breathing room and preparing counterplay. Black plays bishop to h3, check, repeating the threat with precision. White brings the king to f2, trying to stay safe. Black brings rook to f6, more pressure now coming down the f-file. And white plays knight to e2, reinforcing defense in the center. Black responds with knight captures e4 with check. White moves the king to g1. Black plays bishop captures f1. Then pawn captures e5 from white. Black replies with pawn captures e5, gaining full control of the center. Now rook captures f1 from white. Black calmly brings the rook to h6, adding more pressure down the h-file. Then white gives a check, rook to f7, supported by the bishop. Black escapes with king to d6. White strikes again, rook captures pawn on g7. Black now gives rook to h1 check. King moves to g2. Black plays knight to d2, attacking and squeezing the position. White plays rook to g6 check. Black calmly replies with king to c7, then pawn to g4 from white, trying to open up space. But black delivers a crushing blow, rook to h2 check. White plays king to g3, and now comes knight to f1 with check. At this point, white resigns, because after the next move, it's a forced mate in a few moves, with no way to stop it. This historic encounter between Chigorin and Steinitz from the 1892 World Championship shows how quickly pressure builds when pieces are perfectly coordinated, and a single step in the wrong direction can lead to a total collapse. Don't forget, our Beginner to Pro series is coming soon. Stay tuned for more brilliant games and legendary traps.